Hi there. In this video, I want to go over some base concepts when dealing with UVs so that you can use them with intent and you can manipulate them in interesting ways and really understand why it's working the way it is. So with this example here, I've got some UV distortion, I have rotation going on, I have tiling and pivots, and I can really manipulate all of this real time here in this instance. And we're going to dive into how to create this more complex stuff in this setup in a later video, but this is really just the base understanding of UVs so that you can kind of get started. So if we go over to our simple example here, I have this material that is got some tiling. We've got an offset field. We have a tiling field. Right now I'm tiling it 3 times, and I have my texture sampler. So the first thing that I want to talk about is really what are UVs here in Unreal. So really what they are is they're a vector 2, but they're a linear gradient in each one of the coordinates, u or v, that goes from 0 to 1. So in this case, if I mask out my R channel for our texture coordinate, we've got 0 to 1 through the entire space here because these are mapped 0 to 1 on this cube. So that's a great way to really understand this from a fundamental level, right? So if you think about this as a linear gradient, that also unlocks the idea of like, okay, can I put a texture in here? Absolutely, you can put a grayscale texture in your U or V, and that will dictate what your UVs are doing because it's really just mapping whatever your texture is to each one of these values, right? So like your texture 0, 0 is up in this upper corner, and then 1, 1 is down here. So if your texture, if you wanted to sample like 0.5 on your texture, it'll be here. So if you manipulate these UVs, it'll manipulate what it's reading from your base texture. So let's kind of visualize that, right? So something that you might have seen is multiplying your value or your coordinates by some value. So in this case, I'm multiplying by 3. And if I look at the gradient here, I'm seeing, what looks like 0 to 1, essentially because, with color, you can't really visualize an overdrived color past white. So a good way to look at this in a way that's understandable is if you use your F mod, which essentially takes the remainder of whatever your input is and maps that, right? So like in this case, I have it set to 1, so it's a modulo. And once it passes 1, it'll start giving the remainder. So for instance, we've got 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3. But if you think about it with just remainder, 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 1 is 1 with 0 remaining, so it's going to be 0. 1 times 2, 0 remaining, right? And so on and so forth, right? So if I tiled this 4 times, it would fit here 4 times, and then likewise, if I change this to 2.5, you'll see that we've got 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 2.5, or 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 0.5. So we'll set this back to 3. But this is essentially what's happening if you go over to your texture sampler and you have it set to wrap. This is essentially what's happening. So if you have something that goes from 0 to 3 or 0 to whatever number, the wrap is going to wrap that from 0 to whatever number your multiplier is. So if I had 0.5, for instance, it'll just go 0 to 0.5. Likewise, if I do 4, we'll do 0 to 4, but it's 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1. So this is a good way to visualize this. I wouldn't suggest hooking anything up this way to override your wrapping settings because then you'll kind of lose the power of the texture sampler. But this shows you how you can really manipulate your UVs in an interesting way and really kind of visualize like what's going on here. And likewise, if I say offset 0.5 or 0.25 on here, you'll notice that this shifted over. And if I start previewing this. So really what this is doing, it's going, we've got negative 0.5, then 0, and then it goes to 0.75. But because this is, a color that we're previewing, it looks like this is just 0. So that's somewhere that you can kind of get tripped up if you're kind of not really thinking about what the numbers might be, and you're just kind of looking at the color. This is actually negative 2.5 going to 0.75. But again, this works because our modulo it ends up going in absolute, right? So now that we understand how things are going with our multiply and our tiling, let's talk about how clamp works. So if you look at clamp, if I have a tiling of 4 at this point, I have 0 to 4, but what clamp does is it cuts off whatever is at top, and it pushes whatever the last pixel is over to the side, right? So like all of this is 1 because I'm clamping it, and then and then we've got our 0 to 1 space, just like we have with our tiling. Good way to see this visualized a little bit better. So I start previewing this, right? My 0 to 1 space is really in this first quarter of this area. And again, if I plug this into our U, and then I will also do a clamp fmod just to see the remainder. Essentially what's happening with our UV space is it's being compressed into this one little square here, because this is where our ramp is, and then right here is actually going to be whatever that last pixel is, right? So it's going to drag the last pixel here and here, but our true texture space is going to be here. So if we look at that in the sample here, I'll toggle our example, you'll see this last pixel is going to stretch, and this last pixel is going to stretch. And if I do an offset, you'll notice that then it will stretch in these ways as well. This can be really helpful if you have something like a UV, an effects texture or something where you have some kind of element here and you want it to be black or no alpha, or like when it tiles or scales or anything, it just kind of takes that last pixel and drops it, right? So for instance, if I do some kind of fall off, right, you'll be able to kind of see that. Now, this is kind of an error here with the bitmaps, but you get the idea. We'll go back to our default so that we can see this. And again, we can tile this. And if we go back to our setup here and just plug our multiplier back here, instead of clamping or doing the wrap ourselves, we'll let the texture node do it. You'll notice that we can update what our tiling is, and then our offset will update as well. And again, if you update your offset, that'll also kind of update your scale pivot. Now that we understand how to kind of offset and multiply and what's going on with the clamp and everything, something to note is like you can plug in pretty much any 0 to 1 ramp. You could plug in a texture if you wanted to. You can plug in, say, the sine wave here. If I do that into our V, and let's look at our thing, you'll see that we've got this cool mirroring effect, right? So if I just set this to 1 and 0, oh, let's do 3. Right, you'll notice that I've got our 1 pixel here, and then it's mirroring and it's tiling that 3 times, but it's also tiling this way, right? So it's going kind of back and forth with that sine wave. And to visualize that, if we do start preview here, this is essentially what our UV look like at this point, right? So it's going to mirror this, and then it's going to do that, and then this is actually going to be the negative numbers, since the sine goes 1, or from 1 to -1. So it's doing this kind of thing. So this is our negative numbers, and that's why you're seeing this thing here. So that's the base idea of how you end up doing UV distortion. So in this case, right, I have a texture map that I have, uh, data to say push one way or the other. So if I go into, UV distortion here, I've got a normal map, so I've got a red channel and a green channel. I'm not going to worry about the blue channel. And what I'm doing is I'm remapping my normal map from 0 to 1 to -1 to 1. So essentially, you know, uh, 128, 128 is going to be, or 0.5, is then going to be 0, so no movement. And then anything above that's going to be, move up or down or left or right, or up and then left. And then anything lower is, down and right. So that's where you get this cool sort of thing. But that's all really about understanding what you're doing with the UVs. The UVs are just a texture lookup, right? So like each pixel here or each part of this is just looking at your texture and saying, oh, I want to sample 1 or 0, or 0.5, or 0.2, or 0.1, 0.8, wherever on your texture. So then it's going to sample that and kind of show what that is, and that's where you get this nice kind of compression and everything with this as well. So I hope that helped. I hope this kind of demystified some things with UVs. And again, you can put in textures for your UV coordinates instead of using texture coordinates. I wouldn't suggest that, because you might as well have U and V and then manipulate it from there. But this can really kind of help you make really complex stuff and really understand what you're doing here, right? So you're shifting things one way or the other, and you can kind of see where things are going. So again, I hope this helped, and I hope you have a great day.